good topic for today. We picked this one because there was an event probably a couple of months ago now where this imposter syndrome seemed to be coming up a lot in the discussion. So we thought we'd give an opportunity to actually think about it a bit more and decide, actually what it is, how it affected us or other people, and just, debate it a bit more. As you will know from the format of these conversations, these sessions, it's as much about a debate as anything else. If you look up imposter syndrome and who experiences it, you get some fairly surprising names. If you look at those images, those are people that are all pretty successful in their field, but actually they are saying that they are experiencing those doubts and that sense of actually fraudulent being there, and that they don't deserve to be in that place. And looking at the actual term imposter syndrome, it was actually first coined back in 1978. So whilst it's not, I thought it was quite interesting because I never even thought about it this way, it's not considered a mental illness in terms of DSM, where all the illnesses are categorised. It is certainly an area that's been of extensive interest in psychology and research. So it was first actually named back in 1978 in some research by Clance and Imes, and there has been a huge amount of work around that since. And this was a definition that I thought I quite explained it to me quite well. So in fact, that imposter syndrome describes high achieving individuals who, despite their objective successes, fail to internalize their accomplishments and have persistent self-doubt and fear of being exposed as a fraud or imposter. And actually, reflecting back, I can remember, I think the first time I attended an SFT, a senior leadership team meeting, feeling, how am I here? How does senior apply to me? How does the leader apply to me? And, they'll realise that I shouldn't really be here at some point. And, recognising that lots of people experience that regardless of how it may come across. So if we look a bit more about who experiences it, this was what came up within the original research. So the people that were most likely to experience imposter syndrome were those first generation professionals, people with high achieving parents, people who achieved success very quickly, members of minority groups and students. So that was back in 1978. And if you think about it, the world of work has changed dramatically since then, but most, especially, I think, the world of work for women. And if you look up sort of the more popular press, if you like, around imposter syndrome, it talks about it as if it's exclusively something that women experience. Whereas wider research doesn't support that at all. So there was a meta-analysis carried out in 2019. So that looks at lots of studies to see the themes that have come across. And so the meta-analysis covered over 14,000 participants across studies, and found within those populations a massive variation in the level of people experiencing imposter syndrome, very literally from 9% to 82%. And they actually found across that analysis that it was found equally across men and women and across all age groups. The only thing that was consistent with the original findings was that it was found to be particularly high in ethnic minority groups, which is probably a reflection on the work that we still need to be doing around equality and inclusion. Have you had a good conversation in your group? So let's have a bit of a share. So room 2 was Laura, Ruth, Sharon, and Emma. Would anybody from your group like to just share sort of a summary of where your conversation was going?
I don't mind doing that. So yeah, we were talking about how imposter syndrome can kind of have a domino effect on other areas. We talked about striving for perfection, sometimes not being able to let go, as HR professionals giving advice to other people, I guess, on how to manage anxieties or their workloads or whatever it is, but not being as good, I guess, recognizing it in ourselves. And then we talked about the adaptability of like with COVID, and how that sort of change priorities, and so certain things are realistic to deliver and some things aren't, but it's putting that internal and external pressure on ourselves to achieve results with the imposter syndrome.
Thank you. The group 3, that was Catherine, Karen, Kirsty, and then you had a couple of late arrivals. So what sort of things were coming up in your group?
Some of the same things that Sharon's just mentioned. We talked about, you know, different things. Certainly we related it very much with perfectionism, and going over and above to make sure everything is just right, doing extra to what other people might do in the same situation.
And coming from that, from the perspective of not believing that your contribution was valid, or that you didn't, rather than
it having to be perfect. So really having to put extra work in to make sure, and that potentially HR is the wrong profession for all of us. But that was just more of a joke than serious. We're actually all very good at HR. We're all very good at HR. It's just, it's not the job if you want to finish your inbox, let's be honest. So
many professions will probably argue the same case, but certainly. And I think it's because actually, you know, confidence doesn't equal competence.
No.
You know, the fact that somebody might be outwardly very confident and talk the talk doesn't actually mean that they're competent. You know, how often do you hear that? You know, they're very good at, you know, talking the talk, but when it comes to it. So actually, you know, there is a level that an imposter syndrome level of it can fuel motivation. So there is an element of it being a helpful force. But where it becomes unhelpful is the achievement you get as an outcome of that doesn't change your underlying belief that actually that you'll be found out soon, that you don't really know what you're doing. And, you know, drawing on what Catherine's saying, that growth mindset, that learning actually is a really positive, you know, we all know that all the work there is around growth mindset, that drive to learn and to continue to build our expertise is actually a great trait. You know, it's beneficial as long as it is driven by the right underlying beliefs. So it's driven by that, actually, I'm really interested in this, I want to learn more, I want to build my expertise, not coming from a perspective of actually not being good enough and people realize you don't really know what you're talking about. That's where it can be very different. And let's just bring back where we have seen from the research the types of behaviors that actually contribute to making it quite very difficult to overcome because of what, you know, particular themes. So people may work extremely hard, be over diligent. Can you be over diligent? You know, going beyond, but actually they're coming at it from the perspective of avoiding discovery that they don't know what they're doing. So it may pay off in terms of performance. You may gain approval and you get that temporary feeling of, you know, positivity and feeling good. But then you create a cycle, and actually when that's happening, you can eventually see leading to burnout, because you're just constantly striving from the perspective of actually soon somebody will realize I don't really know what I'm talking about. Then the intellectual inauthenticity. Oh, I'm impressed I managed to say that. And recognizing that actually, if we are coming from a place of thinking we don't really know what we're doing, and people will realize actually we're less likely to voice our own views, we're more likely to stay silent, we'll may even say what we think others want to hear, rather than having the confidence to be authentic in our views and sharing our thoughts. Or looking at seeking approval, you know, find having somebody that you admire, and actually working in ways that are tailored to actually get the support and approval from them. So it's the driver to get that validation. If they think I'm good, then they won't know otherwise. And then society expectations. This is quite an interesting one around fearing the consequences of overconfidence. Behaviours that are regarded as, showing off or overconfidence are not generally ones that society as a whole likes or values. And I think we do see that, the gender differences on this, how often you heard the thing, men are regarded as assertive and women are regarded as bossy from the same behaviour. And, we still hear that. And the fear of, being rejected if you come across as know-it-all or being too clever. So if these behaviours are really ingrained, linked to this imposter syndrome, they can be quite difficult to change. So what I'd like you to think about now is, and recognising that it's not serving you. Those behaviours are not serving you well. And I find this particularly interesting in relation to that, into self-compassion, and that being kind to ourselves. We see more and more evidence about the value on our psychological well-being, our performance, of actually valuing ourselves, appreciating ourselves, and driving ourselves from a place of kindness and support. I'm shortly going to be starting some research about self-compassion in female HR professionals, so I may well be coming out to ask for you to help me. But if we look at, the opposite to that, when we believe that we are not, we don't know what we're doing, we don't deserve to be there, actually what's happening is you're getting impaired job performance. You actually get lower job satisfaction because you're not getting that sense of, achievement, of growth, because the driver behind it's not helpful. You get that burnout, and there is that link to comorbidity with both depression and anxiety, which are linked to burnout as well. So it's not serving us well. So let's think about, what could we do differently? So there's a few questions here that I'll put in the chat as well, so you've got them when you go into your groups. And so I'm thinking about from your own experience. And what thoughts am I noticing? So when something happens, and I do something, what thoughts do I notice? And what evidence have I got to support these thoughts? And what counter evidence do I have? It's quite a fun conversation you can have with people sometimes, when they're thinking these things, and they'll sort of say, do you admire your manager? Yes, you really know what they're doing. Does your manager have a good opinion of you? Yes, they're really supportive. So your manager's got very good sense of judgment about everything apart from the fact of what your ability. So actually, think about actually how is it playing out? How can you choose to reframe your thoughts? And what helpful behaviours can I change? So, it's not, we all know that how difficult underlying beliefs are to change, but the first point is actually bringing that into conscious awareness. Welcome back. Got 5 minutes or so to share, the sort of the sum of what you were chatting about, what insights you've got, what you might do differently. So anybody from the first group, who did you volunteer? So that was the group Andy was in, Andy, Shirley, Louise.
Oh, I don't mind sharing, Marion. I don't mind sharing.
Oh, thank you, Andy. Thank you.
It felt like in our group we were kind of tackling most of the questions in a bit of a collective conversation, really, and we were really focusing on how it kind of impacted us in terms of what the imposter syndrome did to us as individuals, and just talking about some of those kind of coping strategies. So Shirley was talking about that whole scenario that you'd picked up around working much harder to kind of, I suppose, counteract some of those feelings of that imposter syndrome. Or whether is it confidence or is it imposter syndrome? We talked about that in the first session. Or is it a mixture of the two? But interestingly, it's not necessarily an unhelpful behaviour, because it certainly made her feel, in her example, less stressed and more prepared. But it is definitely a watch out in terms of reframing how you are approaching that feeling. So is that the only thing you can do, or are there other things you could do to support, reframing that? But also we had a broader conversation about where all these things are coming from in terms of other influences in your life. Imposter syndrome isn't just about being competent, that you can do the job. It's lots of experiences you've had in your life that have shaped you as an individual that mean that pushes certain buttons for you. So we, as a group, it was really nice to hear people sharing in terms of some of the experiences they've had in their life where they felt an imposter going into that situation, be it going to university when they didn't feel that they should be there, or an example like that, where you could actually think some of these, or some of the messages you were given as a child that have influenced how you then approach where you're in now. You may have been told that you won't amount to anything in your life, but actually you have, but you still feel an imposter in that new position. So it's quite a broad conversation. Anything else the group wants to add?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Anna. But I think it's recognising the drivers and the beliefs underneath the behaviours as the thing that we need to take notice of. Because absolutely, if we're career focused, we want to work hard, we want to deliver, and we're doing it through ambition and belief in what we're doing and loving what we're doing. That's a totally different driver, isn't it, from actually feeling we've really got to work hard because we don't know what we're doing, and we never will know everything. That's fine, but we are already experts in our area. We're HR professionals. Doesn't mean to say we're then if you're sitting as part of a team, it doesn't mean you can be an expert in every field around the table, but actually you are the expert in the HR field. Thank you. What about one of the other groups? Group 2, Ruth, Sharon. It looks like we've lost a couple from that group. So any of you comfortable to talk back?
We talked about, was there a past job experience that led you to, doubt yourself? Were you over criticised? Was your work not good enough, which then you take into another role? Find it harder to shake off? And a few of us had examples of that, or where work gets changed as it goes up the chain for approval, and to a point that you no longer recognise it, it's no longer your work, and then you full of self-doubt. And then one of the group members said a way she's thought about combating how she questions her own work is to ask for feedback rather than assuming that it's not good enough. To say, what do you think about it? Any points, any tips, and get a true reflection rather than coming up with it yourself.
Yeah, great point there. Thank you. And the last group, Kirsty, Karen, Lindsay, Catherine.
We didn't get a chance to nominate anybody, so I'm happy to jump in.
Thank you.
You know me, I'll talk now. I don't mind. We actually got quite deep, so and relatively personal from a few. I'm going to say an awful lot. Other people can add if they want to. We really, 3 out of the 4 of us actually have named our annoying voice that sabotages us or tries to, which helps us to separate it from being our own thoughts. In terms of evidence to support our imposter thoughts, we had very little in terms of evidence other than our own beliefs, and obviously we know, and our belief is true, even though we have imposter and not good enough. Work that one out. And in terms of reframing, we had various tips to share about how we personally reframe things and it being out of date information a lot of the time, which goes back to what Ruth was just saying about sort of previous bosses being unhelpful in that respect, for example. And I suppose really unhelpful behaviours. It was more about the thoughts and the reframing and the evidence that we talked about. I don't know if anybody else in the group wants to add to that.
I suspect, that the behaviours are more about the drivers to produce better work, actually checking in with ourselves, whether it's because we're thinking what we're doing isn't any good, or whether we want to improve it because we think it could add a bit more, or actually recognizing it's good enough. And I don't mean that in a mediocre way. I mean, everything can always be improved. There's always scope for learning, but actually we can still produce very good work that's good. So thank you. I'm glad you had a discussion about that. And absolutely, it's not we can talk about it at the top level, we can explain what it is, we can articulate our understanding of it, but actually, as with anything that involves the power of the unconscious mind, actually changing those things is a slightly longer process and a bit more challenging. But I think that the first thing, and recognizing it's influenced by so many factors, sort of the positive leadership, the culture, past experiences. It's not just about us. In terms of in this moment, but I think what you can do is by bringing it more into your own awareness and noticing your thoughts and how you might reframe them, looking at the evidence and the counter evidence is a strategy that you could test and try for a while, or asking other people, getting real cognitive thought distortions, how we get good feedback and we accept all the positives, but the only we ignore all the positives and only pick up on the negative. So checking in with all the things that we're doing. So I hope that was, as you know from these sessions, we're not about sending people away with loads of information and all the answers. A lot of it is around helping you think, go away and reflect, make notes, see what you might want to change. So I hope that has been helpful for you. So as usual, we'll send the link if you wanted to any of the slides, if they were useful, that we've got the questions. And I'll hand back to Amy to bring it all together and close us, please.
Thank you, Marianne. That was a really interesting session.